My name is Kenneth Taylor, and I'll be the one doing the presentation today. I've been involved in campaign finance and doing campaign finance reports for over 40 years, starting with my own when I ran for City Council in Valparaiso. And currently, I have 17 different committees that I serve as treasurer for and do campaign finance reports for. So a lot of what I'm going to give you today is what are the ways to keep track of stuff so that if you ever have any questions on your reports, it's easy to show. And people say, well, what do you mean by questions on your campaign finance reports? Well, I have testified in 2 trials and been interviewed by the FBI and a couple of other cases involving campaign finance reports. So not only are they used within the county for people to know what your campaigns are doing and where your finances are coming from, but they're also looked at by the IRS and the FBI and like that for any irregularities that could occur. So that's why it's very important that you make sure that your campaign finance reports accurately reflect your banking reports, because that's the backup of your campaign finance reports are your actual checking accounts and backup. Okay, and I've been doing training for industrial corporations and this type of training for over 50 years. So I have a little bit of a background, and I've been through the wars, as some would people say. I've even done, unfortunately for one individual, I had to do his final campaign finance report after he had passed away, which presents an interesting question: who signs the finance report? In that case, it was the executor of the will that is authorized to sign the campaign finance reports. So you can get into some tricky stuff. We'll try to keep it to the basics during the presentation, but I just wanted to give you a little background so that you can see that there's a lot to these things, and there's a lot of purposes for these things to be used. First of all, one of the things that you ought to get a copy of, or at least I download it, is the campaign finance report manual. You can get that on the Indiana Secretary of State's website. It's about 180 pages long. So you may not want to print it out, but at least have it on a computer or have it available so that if you have questions, you can go in and ask them. You go to the Secretary of State's website, you go to the election division. She's got election division, go to campaign finance, and on there you'll see a button that says campaign finance manual that you can do and download. Go ahead. Treasurer. The treasurer should not be the candidate. Any candidate that is their own treasurer is a fool. Okay? First of all, your job is to get out there and win the election. And you're going to have reports due. As a matter of fact, who knows when the next report is due? What? It's due the 21st. What's the last day of the report?
8.
What?
8.
Nope. 14th. October 14th, your bank account closes that day as far as the report is concerned, and you report it on the 21st. They'll give you 7 days to get your report in. Now, here's a critical thing. Do not, let's say you closed it on the 14th and you got a fundraiser on the 15th. That fundraiser on the 15th does not go in this report. It goes into the annual report. It's only all transactions up until the 14th of October. All checks written or all checks or contributions received as of that date. Yes?
What is the starting period?
Starting period is April 9th. That's if you filed a pre-primary report, is April 9th is the starting period. And that's your bank balances as of that date. Yeah, Jesse.
Okay, if it ends on the 14th, But prior to the, and I'm sure you're gonna cover this, but I have to leave early, so I'm sorry I'm asking the question, I'm sure you're gonna cover it, but if it ends on the 14th and prior to election day, let's say I get a big contribution over 1,000, do I have to add that to that report, or is that's?
You do not add it to the report. You file what is called a CFA 11, and we will cover that. Yes. Yes, and that's what you hope for. You like seeing the big $1,000 ones come in. Not too many of us get them, but that's what you'd like to see. Okay, a treasurer must be a U.S. citizen, may not be the chairman of a committee except in the case of a candidate. In other words, as a treasurer for 15 different committees, I cannot chair another campaign committee. Okay? You can only be a chairman and a treasurer of your own committee. Must be appointed in writing on the CFA 1. Must file a written instrument of appointment to CFA 1. Person can serve as a treasurer of more than one committee. And if you're crazy, you do that. I'm retired, so I have a lot of time, and it gives me something to do. A chairman of a committee shall appoint and designate the treasurer. In other words, the chairman is the one that appoints you as the treasurer, and you are the only two official officers of the committee, are the chairman and treasurer. The treasurer cannot be the same person as the chairman unless they are the candidate. Go ahead. Bank accounts. I've had some people say, well, I'm not going to really use much money, so I'll just use my personal banking account. No, you just entered a potential problem with the IRS. Because if you put your money in your personal banking account and then use it for campaigns, you have to report the money that you receive as income, but you cannot report the expenses as deductions on your campaign, on your federal forms. So don't do that. So what you got to do is you got to get an EIN number, and you can open up that through the IRS website. Every committee can get an EIN number, and it's required now by the bank.
So we started going through that flow on the IRS website to do that. And
Yeah.
it came to a point where there was a yes/no radio button asking whether you're going to be something to do with 527.
No.
Say no to.
Say no to that one. Yes, yes. The other one is you're not going to pay salaries. If you have people work for you, you pay them as a contractor. And then if you pay them over $600 in a year, you got to give them a 1099 form. So don't pay anybody over $600 if you can help it to do your work for you. Okay, and under the EIN number, that's what we talk about there. The first thing you got to do is you click Other Political Organization Committee. For banking purposes, the individual that's going to be responsible for the account, complete the application, print the letter, and you can take the letter to the bank to open it up. And it takes you less than, well, it takes me less than probably 5 minutes to go through the whole thing. Maybe like 3 or 4 now, but somebody new, it may take a little bit longer. When you open a bank account, you'll need the following things. You'll need your CFA 1 campaign committee form. By the way, this has developed into a recent problem. If you fill out the CFA form on the computer, which we'll get to Easy Vote, a couple of banks have said they didn't like that. They want the one that actually comes from the county. I've talked to a couple of banks and they've cleared it up, but you may have to file an original timestamp from the county.
And if you just call our office, if you encounter that, we can print a copy, timestamp it, scan it back to you, so you don't have to come back into our office again.
And the bank will typically accept that?
Yeah.
Yeah, they will accept the form, it just has to be timestamped.
They just won't accept the seal that comes on the state certified, like the state approved program, the bank won't accept. So they want our little thing that's literally just black ink saying the time. That's acceptable.
So
But I've only heard Center's doing it.
Centura was the one that gave the original problems. I have a couple candidates use Centura, I mainly use First Merchants. You take the CFA1, the EIN letter and number, driver's license for a person signing a check, social security number of the responsible person. I recommend you do not get a bank account that gives you interest. It sounds like a good idea. Let me tell you what happened. I did that one time. All of a sudden, I had to file forms with the IRS because they told the IRS we were giving money in as interest, and I had to file the forms. So I don't want any interest from a checking account. I don't want any fees on a checking account. And there's banks that do, Centura will work with you so that there's no fees, and so will First Merchants. Some of the other banks charge you $5 a month just to have the account there. Well, why waste the money? Go to a different bank.
Horizon will work with it too.
Horizon, I haven't tried them yet, but those are the two I know that will. Another recommendations, no credit cards or ATM cards. Do not give your candidate a credit card to the bank account. Because that candidate's going to go out and charge something that you don't know about, and you may not have enough money in the bank. So therefore, all of a sudden, you've bounced a check. And that's going to cost you some bank fees. And I recommend banking with e-statements because that way it's a lot easier to keep track of everything. Okay? Any questions on that? I'm also going to make one other recommendation at this point because we talk about bank cards. I recommend you do not use PayPal to pay your bills on a reoccurring basis. I've had a couple candidates do that, and when they stopped the service, PayPal kept charging. Like one was $899 in a month. Bounced the check, bounced it, $37 charge. Because the company that originally started it never notified PayPal to stop it, even though we had notified them to stop it. So be very careful if you use an automatic charge system on your accounts. Okay, next thing I do, and this is important in case you ever have to justify anything, is I set up a filing system, and I do it on my computer, okay? And I set up a records file, a file that has all the bank statements in it. A file that has a copy of all the deposits I make. I copy every check that I make a receipt. A file for all invoices and receipts. And then a spreadsheet for income and expenses and any forms, like the CFA forms and stuff. You can see it on the slide presentation there. This file is on my computer. When I talked about going before the FBI and like that in the court, I had to make a copy of every one of those documents for the FBI. That was a banker's box full of copies, and that took a lot of time. Now, all I got to do is hand them a disk, a little thumb drive. Here's all my records. So if you keep it on a computer and scan it into a computer, it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier. Next slide. Bank statements, as you can see, there's a file for one of my candidates. I got all the bank statements in there, and I can use the bank statements then to cross-check my contributions and expenses. Again, everything's coordinated with your bank statements. Next file. Again, I've got all the deposits. And by the way, the date that you receive money is not the date you get the money. So not the date on the check. It's the date you deposit the money. That's the date of receipt. And why is that way? Anybody got an idea? You can back it up with the deposit statement, and the other thing is, sometimes you'll get a check, and I'll give you an example. Mayor Murphy just had a golf outing. He got a check for $5,000 for a sponsorship. He would not accept the check because it was from a corporation, and corporations are limited to $2,000. So the check had to be returned to the company and different checks issued in order to be under the $2,000 limit. So therefore, if you have recorded that he received it, then it's back what date you use. You put the date of actually when you deposit it in the bank. And you may get money from somebody, you say, well, wait a minute, I don't want to take their money. Well, if you return it to them, you never have to show it on your report. It's the date you accept the money is the date on the deposit by state law. By state law, it's when you make the deposit is when the date is set. If you make copies of everything, later on you can go back and look at them. Okay?
Why is there a limit on what you can receive?
We'll talk about the limits in just a little bit. Yeah, there is limits. There's only 2.
Yeah.
Next, all kinds of copy receipts and invoices is another file I keep so I can cross-check. Next. Okay, let's talk about contributions, expenditures, and debts. This is a little flow chart to show we'll start out with contributions. Next. $100 rule. There's a rule in state law that says you must report every dollar you receive over $100, you must itemize. If somebody gives you $50, you don't have to show it on your report, you show it as unitemized income. If somebody gives you $101, you have to show it on your report as to who it comes from. Now, there's a couple of exceptions to that rule. One is if you receive, let's say Jesse writes me a check for $50, and I'm a candidate for the township board, and he writes me a check for $50 out of his campaign funds, because he's a candidate for trustee. Then I have to report that. Any committee-to-committee checks, regardless of the amount, must be reported. Okay, but if it's under, that's one exception to the rule of $100, where money less than $100 has to be reported. Another exception, let's say a husband and wife write you a check for $200. If both the husband and wife signs the check, you do not have to report it. But it must have both signatures on the check, because it's then considered $100 from the wife and $100 from the husband, if they both sign it. Okay, so that's an exception. The other exception is on expenses. If you pay a business less than $100, you do not have to itemize that on your expense reports. But now, let's talk a little bit more about that rule. That's $100 during an entire year. Okay? Let's say somebody gave you $50 in the primary, and they give you $75 in the fall. In the primary, you did not have to itemize it. In the fall, you have to itemize it, and you itemize the $75, and then the year-to-date number shows $125. Because they give you $50 back in the primary. But in the fall, you only put down the 75 and the 50. Okay, because the other, and somebody says, what was 125? Somebody says, well, where's the other 50? It's in your primary report as unitemized income. So that's the way you handle that when you do. Same thing with a business charges. You gotta add them up as you go along. Contributions. Most of the time, you get contributions in the form of checks. Easy. Boy, that's the coolest thing to get checks. It's the easiest thing to handle is checks. I love checks because not only are they easy to handle, I can keep copies of them, and they give me a wealth of information as we'll go through. The next thing is cash. You can receive cash. There's nothing wrong with cash, except you've got to make sure you record who the cash came from. Remember that 70, 50, and 75 I talked about? What if it was $50 cash in the primary and $75 cash in the fall? Where do you have any designation of that? The other thing with cash is make sure, and this is where a couple of people got themselves in serious trouble. As a matter of fact, one's sitting in jail right now over this very issue. Received $7,000 in cash. The campaign owed him $7,000. Committee owed him $7,000. He just took the $7,000 and never put it through the account. And he got charged with that being a bribe. But he had no record. So if you're going to get cash, you got to have a record of it, put it into the campaign account, and then expend it out of the campaign account. So therefore, it's all public record and knowledge. In kind. This is another one that most of you screw up on. and it's understandable. I own a t-shirt business. Okay? And I hate to keep picking on Jesse, but I'm going to. He's a good guy. I own a t-shirt business. I say, Jesse, you're running. I'm going to give your campaign 100 t-shirts. Jesse says, oh, wait, that helps. I don't got to go out and spend money for that. Except that when I give him 100 t-shirts, he's got to show on his campaign report a contribution from me for, I'll say you're $15 a piece for the t-shirts, for $150 as an in-kind donation, as a contribution. He also has to show up on the expense side, $150 back to me for providing the t-shirts to him. So anytime somebody provides you a service that you would normally pay for, or something that you would normally pay for, you have to report that as an income and an expense. Okay?
Even though you don't have an expense.
Even though you don't have an expense, you got to report it both ways, income and expense. That way it comes out to be zero. That way it comes out to be zero. And I've had a lot of candidates who will put it down as an income or they'll put it down as an expense and it won't match. And then they say, well, why is my report off? That's the reason part of the reason why your report's off. Loans. Sometimes, and I always have every candidate do this, just as a safety precaution. If a candidate puts their personal money into the campaign, I always say, put it in as a loan. And if you're fortunate enough to raise a lot of money, and there's some money left over at the end of the campaign, you can pay yourself back the loan. Okay? That's the most common type of loan that I've seen. I don't think I've seen where one campaign loaned another campaign money. That just don't happen too often. Okay, next one. Here's another one that's developed in the last year or so. Charges. Contributions made by charge or direct deposits. Everybody now with a younger generation likes to use charge cards and Venmo and what's the other? Oh, PayPal and like that to give contributions. Great, but when you set those things up for your committee to accept the charges as a contribution, okay, You need to make sure that you have the correct information. Give you another example. Was that one of my candidates wanted to use Venmo and wanted to use PayPal? Great. Somebody Venmo'd him $200. He says, and it said, John Smith. I said, okay, Mr. Candidate, what's John Smith's address? What's John Smith's occupation? Well, I don't know, he just sent me the money. Well, fortunately, John Smith attended the fundraiser so I could get the name and address off the fundraiser. But if you don't set it up properly, that $200, how are you going to know? You have to report that he gave it to you, and you've got to report his name and address. And if you don't have that information, now you're out scratching as a treasurer to get that information. So make sure when you do set up to accept that you do get the proper information. The other thing is, a lot of those services charge you money. WinRed, which is the Republican national way of collecting money, and ACME, which is the Democrat way of collecting money nationally, they charge you a fee. By the way, they charge more than like Square does, but that's beside the point. I'd rather use Square because I'm a cheap guy and don't want to pay a lot of fees. But what happens is you have to report the full contribution. They gave you a $100 contribution. Square takes $4.35 of that. So therefore, you report $100 income and $4.35 worth of expense to Square, WinRed, whatever the charge are. That's another mistake a lot of people make. They only report the $96 as income, and that's wrong. It's $100 they intended you to get. The fact that you have a service charges in your campaign. Next. I talk about setting up a spreadsheet. This is a sample spreadsheet that shows where the income comes from. And you'll notice on this spreadsheet, this is the easiest way to keep track of things. I use an Excel spreadsheet. Some people like to use QuickBooks. QuickBooks are not that youth-friendly for campaign finance reports, and you can't get the information easily. That's why I use a spreadsheet. Across the top, back up one. Across the top is the date of deposit, the amount, how did I get the money? You'll see there's squares here, there's an in-kind, and the check number. Who did I get the money from? Their name and address, and if it's over $1,000, their occupation. Was it a direct or in-kind or loan? And then what kind of classification it is. So we'll talk about classifications in a little bit. That way, when I go to fill out my reports or type my report into the spreadsheet, it's all there. It's all, once you got this spreadsheet, it makes it easy to follow your reports. Next slide. Contribution types. There's actually 5 different type of contributions. Individuals, that's easy. That's people who give you money. Corporations, that's checks that you received that are written by a corporation, and we'll define each of these in a minute. Or labor organizations, and that's labor unions that do not use PAC money, and I'll explain the difference there. Political organization committees, political action committees. That's like the Indiana Realtors Association. The Iron Workers Local is actually a PAC. It's not a union. Most unions do not give people money. The only ones I think I know of that do is sometimes fire departments and police organizations give you money out of their general funds, but they also sometimes have PACs. And so you got to watch which it is. And then other organizations, and that's anything that doesn't fit the first 3 categories. Okay, so let's go ahead and define some of those. Individuals, well, that's fairly easy, that's somebody to write a check out of their personal account. Corporations. Corporations are any companies that are filed as a for-profit corporation with the state. Here's where the little weirdness comes in. If they're an LLC or LLP, they are not considered a corporation. Okay, a partnership or a LLC is not considered a corporation for campaign finance law. Okay? And they end up going, and if you're not sure, you can go to the Secretary of State's website, do a business search, and they'll tell you if they're a corporation or LLC or partnership. If they're a corporation or LLC, a partnership or LLC, then they go on to the other form, not on the corporate form. And it's easy to mix these up. Next, labor unions. Labor unions generally do not give you checks. Labor unions have all formed PACs and give you a check through their PACs. And it'll generally say on the check, PAC. Or it'll have educational information PAC or something like that on the checks. So you've got to put them down as PAC. And now why is it important on corporations and labor unions? Corporations are limited to $2,000 for all candidates, all local candidates. Unions are limited to $2,000 for all local candidates. Okay? And I can tell you corporations, a lot of corporations form PACs so they can give more than $2,000 locally. Unions form PACs so they can give more than $2,000. So that's why you've got to be careful as to what you do. Because if for an example, that company had given Matt $5,000, if we had deposited that check and reported that check to the election board, that corporation can be charged 3 times the amount of money they gave Matt in excess of $2,000. So that check for $5,000 was they could fine that corporation $9,000 for excess contributions. So that could have actually cost them $14,000 to make that one contribution. And guess what? You think you'd ever see a contribution from that company again? They don't, most of them are smaller corporations, they don't know the rules, so therefore it's up to you as a treasurer to help them along the way.
Is that an Indiana rule or federal?
It's an Indiana campaign finance rule. It's not a federal. Federal rules, I don't mess with. I don't mess with federal campaign finance at all. And if you really get, it's interesting, I had a nephew that was running for Illinois. He asked me some questions, so I looked up their laws, and it was totally different. Their limits and how people can give money is totally different than Indiana. So each state has its own for local candidates and state candidates.
So that check in the same amount, $5,000, if you keep you a PAC.
If it came through from a PAC, it's acceptable. PACs are unlimited, individuals are unlimited, and others are unlimited. It's the only 2 limits are corporations and unions. Okay, another again is LLPs, LL candidate committee, party committee. Here's another one. A party committee, the Porter County Republican Party, the Porter County Democrat Party, the Valparaiso Democrat Party, the Valparaiso Republican Party are not PACs. They're parties. They go under the other. They do not go under PACs. Unless they formed a PAC, which would be new to me. Next. Okay, and that's one of the reasons why I keep copies of every check I deposit is so I can look. Keel Mechanical Corporation. is a corporation. It says on there, H&S Ventures LLC. That tells me that. This Donald Weiss is an individual. The Northern Indiana Operators Joint Labor Management PAC, better known as Local 150. On the checks, most checks will distinguish what they are. And that's why it's always important to keep copies of the check in case you forget to enter it immediately. And we just talked about why it's important. Now let's look at the expenditures. Go ahead. If you're going to have a campaign staff, whether it's Unite Reach $900, you need them to fill out a W-9. And by the way, some companies that will be making donations to your campaigns may request a W-9 from you. Okay? So be ready to prepare to send W-9s to any corporation that makes a donation to you. Okay?
Corporation, not a PAC. That distinction.
If they ask for, and I've had PACs ask for W-9s. Some will ask for W-9s. And if they do, fill one out and send it to them. Another thing I recommend you have is what we call an expense reimbursement. Let's say the candidate went out and bought candy for the trick-or-treating that's coming up on October 14th downtown Valpo. And you're going to give away candy for that. And your candidate says, well, I'll go get the candy, we got enough money in the, we don't have enough money in the account, I'll pay for it, and we can get it from the account later. Have them fill out this expense form. That way it's easy to keep track of the expenses. Okay? And easy to pay. Next. If you have campaign workers, some larger campaigns have people go out door to door and they pay them. Well, if you pay them, you need a record of this. I worked over in Wright County and they do this quite extensively where they'll pay people $5, $10, $20, $15, $20 an hour to go out and pass out literature. We had them, everybody signed in on one of these forms when we gave them the money. So therefore, we had a record of who we paid and how much we paid them. Again, put together a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet says what check number you wrote, who you wrote it, the date you wrote the check, who you wrote it to, the type of business, the address, the purpose of the expenditure, the code, and the type of expenditure. This is another spreadsheet I use, and then when I'm going to fill out the report, it's easy to do. Codes. Here's another place where people screw up. There's a little box that you got to fill out that says code, and there's basically 5 codes. The first one is contributions. If you write a check to the Valparaiso Kiwanis for sponsorship of their pancake breakfast, that's a donation or a contribution. Therefore, that's what you see for. If you contribute to another candidate's committee, that's a contribution. Any contributions you make to community organizations, political organizations, or like that. Fundraising. You're going to put out a fundraiser. You're going to send out 1,000 invitations, hold it at the local Legion, have some food, have a band. How do you report that fundraiser? That fundraiser gets reported 3 different categories. And this is the one people mess up the most on. The printing of the flyers that you mail out is considered advertising. Because you're mailing out 1,000 flyers and you ain't going to have 1,000 people on your fundraiser unless you're dreaming or really good. So it's considered an advertisement. The postage that you put on the flyer that you sent out, that's operational. Any postage is operational. Now then, the hall rental, the food, the band, the decorations, that's the fundraising part. Okay? So that's the one that most people lump everything together under fundraising. And I generally let that slide, but I'm going to get a little bit more particular as time goes on. But it's actually 3 different codes. A fundraiser is 3 different codes. Anytime you have something printed, put it down under advertising. Anytime you have any postage, it's operational. Then the rest of the expenses around the fundraiser is actually fundraising. Next is advertising, and again, as I say, that's anything printing. And then operational is if you pay people, like I have people pay me to take care of their books for them, it's considered an operational expense. Postage is operational. If you rent a facility to have a campaign headquarters, that's operational. If you use a cell phone for your campaign and you pay for the cell phone out of the campaign, that's operational. Yes.
All right, so if the candidate is paying, so they say the candidate pays out of pocket initially before the money starts to come in, to the consultant for preparing their books and that kind of stuff. So then the campaign is going to reimburse the candidate. So is that still an operational?
Yes, it's an operational reimbursement. So you may write a check, and I've had this happen, where you write a check to the candidate for, say, $500, and it's 3 different items. One is they got something printed, and they paid for it. Another one is that they paid for postage, and another one is that they actually bought candy for something. So therefore, there's one is advertising, one is operational, and one is no, the other was a contribution, made a contribution. So it could actually be. So you have 3 different line items.
So with that example on the income side, the income form, there was the 500 or whatever coming in, that's one line. But over here now, the expended,
Yeah, it could be 3 lines. Yep. Yep. Okay, and any travel. I've had campaigns, and I'll give you an example. Candidate running for state senator had 7 counties that he traveled on. When he went to campaign events, he would keep track of the mileage and record the mileage as an expenditure. Reimbursement for mileage is an expenditure. Okay. Forms, CFA 1, CFA 4, CFA 11. We'll go into those as we go along. We will not cover CFA 1 in this, just CFA 4 and 11 next. Reporting period. As I talked about before, the reporting period is from 4/9 to 10/14. You must file by 10/21/2022 at noon. And if you're filing in the county, it's noon time here. If you're filing downstate, it's noon in Indianapolis, which is 11 o'clock here. And by the way, if you don't file on time, it's a $50 a day fine, starting with 12/01 on the 21st. And the election board will fine you. And if you don't believe it, start asking some of your fellow candidates that got fined in the last primary in the last annual elections. Then Jesse talked about what is called the large checks. From the 15th of October to the 6th of November, if you get a check over $1,000 from any one source, $1,000 or more from any one source, you must file a CFA 11 within 48 hours of receipt of that check. Okay? You must file within 48 hours. That is a separate form than the CFA 4. But you do not have to amend your CFA 4 that you've already filed. And then you have an annual report due on, at the end of the year, 12/31, filing date, they give you 18 days to file that one. Next. There's 4 parts, there's this part of the community information, candidate information, contributions, expenditures, debts, summary, and sign-off, and we'll go through each of those parts. And by the way, I'm going to recommend you all use the new county form. Because you know why? I like to have my life easy. Okay. It's an automatic computer program, and what happens is, it makes sure you put all all the information in there. If you don't use it, you probably will forget something, and guess what happens? What happens, Jesse, when you forget something? You get an email with a little copy of your form with red writing on it. It says, correct this form, yeah, you can. Correct this form, and this is what you need to do to correct it. So, I review both, all the reports except the ones I do, somebody else does mine, reviews mine. But I review all the reports and I send it back, and then the election board sends it back to you saying correct them. And you have, by the way, you have 10 days to correct it, and if you don't correct it, you can be fined $10 a day for not correcting the form. Next slide. First decision, do you want to file the form by hand or file it by using Easy Campaign Finance? And I'm going to recommend you use Easy Campaign Finance. It's a very simple thing to use, and by the way, once you use it, it has a memory. So if you use it a second time, it remembers whose name you put in. It remembers a lot of stuff, so it's a lot easier. So the more reports you do, the easier it is to use campaign. And not only that, if you do more than one, it remembers from one report to the other report. So it really speeds up the process. And it makes it easier for you to not make mistakes. Next slide. When you go on to Easy Campaign Finance, this is the first slide you'll see. And that has all the offices and all the candidates. Next.
Sorry, I'll be right there.
That's okay.
Or she steps away and I go for that.
You should be able to just click the button. Oh, you went way back.
I thought we were on slide 21.
Keep going.
We're going back.
No, go forward.
I was going to say, I thought we were on 21.
Keep going forward.
Are you sure? Okay.
Yep, keep going. Keep going. All right, go forward next.
Thank you. Sorry.
That's okay.
Don't want to hold you up.
Once you go into the form, you're going to want to register your campaign committee. Okay? You click on, there's a little button up there that's circled that says click on it, and click on it, go to the next one, and you fill out that form. Next slide. Next, you're going to select an email and password. Everything's passwords these days. Then you submit it. And when you submit it, you'll get a letter from the election division, an email from the election division saying that you've submitted it, and then when it's approved, you'll get an email saying you're approved to use it, and you can start using it. Next. Now you can go in and log in and start getting ready to file a report. You're going to want to follow CFA 4 to start out with. You can set it up. And by the way, you can do this tomorrow. Okay? And I'll tell you right now, I have 17 reports. They are all exactly matches the banks as of last week, Friday, was the last time I updated them all. You can update them at any time and save them, so you don't have to wait till the end. That's the beauty of this report also. You can update it every week, every month, whatever. Go ahead, next. Now you're going to start filling out the committee information. And by the way, the committee information must match your CFA 1. Don't change the name of your committee on your CFA 4 different than your CFA 1 that you filed with the county earlier. It's all the same, folks. You're not all of a sudden a new committee and a new thing without filing a new CFA 1. You can either do it on the hard copy or in Campaign Finance Wizard. Next. You enter the data as to the reporting period, the amount of money you had on hand on January 1st, and the amount of money you had on hand as of April 9th. Okay? The blue is April 9th, the red is January 1st. Okay? Next. Now, normally in the old days, you had to go through and fill out this whole form and type it in or handwrite it in. And by the way, when you get a 75-page report, that's a lot of handwriting. You put it into the computer and it automatically generates the report. So all you gotta do is enter the data into the computer. It's a lot easier. I guarantee it's a lot easier. Next. So for all 5 levels of contributions. Next. Next. Now we're going to get to the easy one. We're going to enter a contribution. I just put up the committee in, now we're going to enter a contribution. So I put in add a contribution. Go to the next screen. Here's where I select whether it's a contribution from an individual or organization. Next screen. Now I fill in the data. Now you will notice those little red marks. Okay? That says you must put something into that square. That's data you must enter. And if you don't enter it, you can't save it and can't go forward. So this is what I mean by not making mistakes by leaving stuff off the report. When you use the automatic report, it makes sure that you put all the proper information in. So if you got that Excel spreadsheet that we talked about, you just transfer the information from the Excel spreadsheet to these boxes.
So copy and paste.
You can't copy and paste.
So you have to still type it in.
You gotta type it in. But now, let's say, for an example, you got a contribution from somebody and then you get a second one, their information is forever in that report. So therefore, it does get easier as you go along with the more reports you do. And if you're doing more than one report for more than one candidate, it covers all the candidates that you've worked on. So like for an example, if I have a contribution from Matt Murphy, I probably have the same person contributing to Jeff Ballin. So therefore, I type in the person's name and it pops all that information, automatically fills. So it's really nice for guys like me to have more than one candidate. But it does keep it from report to report, and hopefully you'll win this election and go on to other elections and have other reports to fill out, and we'll keep that information for you. Next one. And I take you through line by line what you can do, all the information that comes from the Excel spreadsheet. Next. This now is the organization. Walk you through that. Next. This is all entering the in-kind donation we were talking about. Next. Now, then, once you've entered all your contributions that you're going to enter as itemized, then you put in the prior itemized contributions year to date. Let's say you did a primary report and we had itemized contributions in the prior report of $500. You put that number in there from your previous report. If you had none in your previous report, it's zero. Next line is, I'm sorry. Then next is unitemized contributions this period. If you chose not to itemize all the contributions because some of them were small, and by the way, a lot of people do not want you to put their name on the report. And as long as it's under $100 or less, you don't have to. Okay? This is where unitemized comes in. And the reason they don't want that is because these are public record. And I know candidates that will go through the other reports and say, who gave to Democrat candidates? Or who gave to Republican candidates? I'm going to send them a fundraising letter from me. Well, it could be Joe Schmo that's a friend of Jack Smith's. Well, Joe Schmo don't want to get 25 fundraising letters from all the other candidates. So he only gave you $50. He don't want to leave them on the report. That's really what the $100, that's part of the $100 rule. Okay, those go under unitemized. And then any unitemized contributions year to date is what you got in this period. Next. Public questions. You're going to see a thing that says public questions. You are not a public question. This is basically for referendums and stuff like that. So just ignore that page, skip over it, say, click save, and go on. Next is record your expenditures, all the stuff that has to be recorded on the old forms. You have to handwrite, check all these boxes and stuff. And I'll tell you, one of the ones that people most often don't check is the recipient's occupation. Active Signs is a company that does yard signs. What's their occupation? Yard signs. I mean, it seems silly, but you got to put both in. You put the name Active Sign in the red, recipient's occupation is yard signs. Now, let's say, for an example, I write a check to a campaign, from one campaign to another. Then the occupation, recipient's occupation is a campaign committee. The office sought is whatever office that candidate is seeking. Is it a direct in-kind return contribution, other? And what was the purpose of the thing? This is another one people put down. Well, I got Active Signs. Well, what do you think the purpose was? Who's yard signs? I don't care. I don't know because I'm not politically involved. I'm just Joe Schmo off the street. You got to put in that Active Signs, major yard signs. The purpose of the expenditure was for yard signs. The date of the expenditures, how much you spent to date this year, the amount and the amount year to date and the date. Okay, next. Again, if I'm going to use the computer program, I just click on Add Expense. Click that one. Next. Again, everything in red I got to fill out. Whether it's an organization or an expenditure to an individual, next. Take the information from my spreadsheet and start filling out the squares. Simple. Next. Same thing, this is for, in this case, it's for a business. Next. Again, you've got the year-to-date numbers you got to add in from the previous reports. In this report, anything that you did not itemize. Next. Debts. Here is where you put in if the candidate or somebody loaned the committee money. Okay? Let's go next. There's two types of debts. Debts owed, those owed by the committee and those owed to the committee. Most of the time, it's going to be debts that things that you owe. There's two types. One, and most common one, is the fact that the candidate loaned the committee money and you haven't paid it back yet. The second type of debt is a debt of a bill that you've received but you've not paid as of October 14th. Let's say, for an example, you ordered some signs and you got them, and you got the bill on the 15th or the 14th, but you haven't written the check yet. That's a debt you owe. Okay? That's not as common. Now, one point. If during the campaign you write a check, the candidate pays for something, and you write a check before October 14th back to that candidate, that is not a debt owed, or it's not a debt. It's money that you've just transferred within the period. The only money owed is any money that the candidate has put into the campaign that you've not paid back by October 14th. Okay?
If you write the check on the 14th, but they haven't deposited it,
If you write it on the 14th, it's considered that you've given them the money. If you write it and mail it. Yes. Okay, next. Here's the report. You got to fill out all this information. It's easier on the computer if you do it by the spreadsheet. Next. There's the debt. Then you select which type of debt it is. Next. Again, you fill it, and once you fill out the income or expense, it's easy to fill these things out because it's the same information. Next. If you owe money to a vendor, like a signing company or something like that, that's that type of thing. Next. Now you need to summarize all the pages of the report. This means if you're doing it by hand, you got to add up all the totals on all the pages and enter the numbers. The computer does that for you. That's why I love the computer. You don't have to, I don't know how many times I've seen adding errors people have made. Simple adding errors that they've made in filling out the reports. Next. Then you enter them in there, your cash on hand, your itemized and unitemized, both this period and year to date. Next. Same thing with the next lines, you start totaling them up. And by the way, if you fill it out by hand, make sure you total these numbers correctly. I don't know how many times I've had people not total them correctly. And then they wonder why the numbers are off. Next. I want to point out a line. Line number 18. Bill 18A and 18B should be the exact same number. It's the cash you have on hand this period and the cash you have on year to date. Well, it's called cash on hand. If those two numbers are different, go back, you just messed up someplace along the line, and start checking. I don't know how many reports I get in where those numbers do not match. It's an automatic reject. Those numbers have got to match. And by the way, they should match your bank statement, minus any outstanding checks that have not cleared. If you take your bank statement out of any outstanding checks that have not cleared, they should match your bank statement. It's like at the end of the month, how much money you got in your bank statement. minus whatever checks. It's just like balancing a checkbook in that respect. Next. These are any debts you owe or debts owed to you. Next. Guess what? When you hit that summary button, it'll come up and give you all those numbers automatically filled in if you use a computer form. So you can look at them and say, oh yeah, that looks like, that matches my Excel spreadsheet. Next. Then you gotta sign it and turn it in. And the computer program, it's this way. Next. Here you go to sign, and what'll come up is a preview. And it will show, it gives you a chance to look at your report as it will be submitted and as it will be online. Okay? Now, you're not done yet. When you click OK on the preview, come to the next screen. At this point, you enter your password. You hit the button that, you click this that says, yes, I've reviewed this report and it's accurate. And you hit the submit button. Not to save, you want to hit the submit button. And when you hit the submit button, it automatically goes to voter registration and elections. So you don't have to go to the clerk's office. You don't have to go to the voter registration election. You can sit at home in your jammies and hit submit, and it's gone. And then it becomes a time stamped, and you have proof that you filed the report and the time that you filed the report. Okay? So that's an easy way. Oh man, I live up in Portage, and it's 10 minutes to get to Valpo, so I don't get fined $50. Just hit submit, and it's gone. Another advantage. Now then, we're in that special process time. October 15th to November 6th. Guess what? My good friend that owns this, my good friend over here decided he's going to give me $5,000 to help the campaign out. So all of a sudden, I have to now file a new report, CFA 11. And let me tell you the philosophy behind this report. And this used to be done. People would hold contributions back. Because let's face it, your opponent's looking at your campaign finance reports. I guarantee you that. And they're saying, well, Ken Taylor's only got $150 in his campaign. He can't do much more before in the next 30 days. I got me $5,000 in my campaign. I can spend a lot of money. He can't. Well, he was holding contributions, and all of a sudden he puts $10,000 worth of checks into his campaign. And you didn't know about it. And you weren't prepared for it. So this is a way to get away from that October, what they used to call the October surprise. Was that if I held those checks back, and they were over $1,000, I now have to report them.
It's not a single check over 1,000, it's just a combined.
No, it's any one check over 1,000. It's not combined. I could have several $500 checks and I wouldn't have to report them. It's $1,000 or more from one source. Okay? So it didn't totally solve that problem, but it helped solve. Most of them were big checks coming in at the end in the old days. So that was why this report was generated. And you must file this report within 48 hours. Again, you can do it by hand or next. You go to campaign finance report, fill out the same information you fill out on your original report, and file. It's called the CFA 11 Wizard. Fill it out there, submit it, and it's easy to do. And because you've already been doing it automatically on the computer, it has a lot of information already filled out for you. Next. Next. Any questions that I've not covered? Yes.
All right, going back to my instance of where the candidate is paying the consultants until the money comes in the bank account.
Yeah.
And then, it's a monthly charge for the consultant to be doing the preparation. So, on the first report, it's the candidate going to be reimbursed for the $50 paid to the consultant. Now, in the future, it would be the candidate's bank account paying the consultant.
That's correct.
So then, so that would be an unitemized expense for the first $50. But once you hit, past the $100 threshold, does the reimbursement from the candidate, individually, and then the campaign finance committee, does that combined 100 future going to be unitemized?
No, it doesn't become itemized.
Okay.
You're better off just itemizing it in that case if you know it's a reoccurring expense. If it's a reoccurring expense and it's going to be over $100 during the period, just itemize it all the way through.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? By the way, when you're filling out your reports, if you have a question about anything, call me or send me an email and I will respond to you. If you check with a lot of candidates, and by the way, I do that for both parties equally. Even though I am the executive director of the Republican Party, I treat, as far as campaign finance reports are concerned, I treat everybody exactly the same. I will help anybody do the reports equally, okay? And if you call me, I will answer it as best I can. If I don't know the answer, I have Brad King, who's the head of the election division, and Michelle Thompson, who's a campaign finance expert in the state, on speed dial, and they all return my calls fairly rapidly. Yes.
Can we get the electronic copy of this presentation?
Pardon?
Can we get your electronic copy of this presentation?
Yes. Send me an email and I will send you an electronic copy. The only thing is you cannot copy it and use it for training for other people. It is copyrighted. You can use it for your own purpose electronically, yes.
So my question is very specific to my wife's situation. She's the actual candidate. She's running for the township board seat in a very small township.
Right.
So and she made it through the primary, but we have done none of this.
Right. You don't make it, she doesn't make enough money and you haven't, she doesn't make enough money and you haven't spent enough money yet,
We
right?
haven't spent a nickel, we haven't made a nickel.
Right.
So you mentioned something about a $50 a day.
If you do not make over $5,000, if you make over $5,000 a year in the office that you're gonna hold, you have to file a CFA 1 and a CFA 4 each reporting period, even if you don't spend any money. If you make less than $5,000 a year and you spend less than $100, then you don't have to file the reports. If you make less than $5,000 a year and spend over $100, then you have to file the reports.
Are we going to have?
Except for school boards, I think there's $500 on school board.
Will we have a problem because we missed before 18?
No, you will not have a problem.
So her first filing is going to be October 21st.
October 14th, close date, filed by October 21st, yes. Anybody else? Yeah, there is that little quirk of the 100 and 500 and 5,000 for offices, that whether they have to file CFA 1 or not.
I read in Bradford Gloss, my report, closed out my account,
You gotta open up a whole new account.
okay, which I did, which was all this bank that we used, the checks and everything from the previous.
Well, that's fine, that's between you and the bank.
The fact is, I did the opening, we had filed the proper forms. So this form, I fill out on the 14th, is just from the reopening, right?
Right, it's from the reopening date of when you formed your committee.
So now, which is a different date than the reporting period.
Yeah, it is a different date than the reporting period because you opened up your campaign late. Yes.
Yeah, so in other words, I used the date that I actually opened it rather than.
Yes, the date you actually opened the committee,
Okay.
yes. Yep, any other questions? Thank you, and I'm available anytime by phone or email.
Thank you, that was super informative.
By the way, the one reason I spend so much time up front versus the forums is because if you set up the committee and you set up those Excel spreadsheets right away, that will make it so much easier to do all the rest of it.
This is a Porter County meeting, that's.
So getting to my specific instance, my wife is a candidate, I don't know what. Okay, but she can't be treasurer.
She can.
But you recommended against her. So I could, who would be committee chair
She could be the committee chair.
candidate, and I'll just be the treasurer.
Yeah, I know,
That's
I
fine.
know, I know.
Okay,
All
thank you.
the information that you gave, does that pertain to party committees as well?
Yes.
I'm not a candidate, I
Yeah.
just signed up as
Right,
treasurer.
Yes.
You got it?
The facing from CFA 1, CFA 4.
No, CFA 1, no.
Okay.
Then CFA,
Yeah. I think there are.
once
Two,
a
I've got this one down. I just need to- Yeah, it's a full party committee. And do you know, like, I looked at the